At 2 a.m., Ryan Cole threw his wife out of their mansion. She was 9 months pregnant, she was having contractions and she was crying for help. He slammed the door because he thought she was a burden. He thought she was weak, but Ryan made a fatal calculation. He didn't know that the woman shivering on his doorstep was secretly the heir to a $500 million fortune. And that door clicking shut, that wasn't the end of her life. It was the beginning of his destruction. The contraction didn't start like a wave. It hit like a car crash. Laya Harrington gasped, her breath hitching in her throat as the muscles around her unborn child seized with a violence she had never known. Her palms slapped against the cold, imported Italian marble of the hallway, sliding slightly on the sweat that had instantly slicked her skin. The pain was blinding, a red-hot iron twisting in her lower back, stealing her ability to stand, to think, to speak. But as she looked up through the haze of agony, expecting to see a husband's hand reaching out to catch her, she saw something that hurt far worse than the physical pain. She saw Ryan Cole checking his watch. He stood 10 feet away, framed by the central bedroom doorway, looking immaculate in his travel clothes. There was no panic in his eyes, no fear for the mother of his child. There was only irritation. He adjusted a silver cufflink, his face creased not with worry but with the annoyance of a man whose schedule had been interrupted by a nuisance. "Of course it's now," he muttered, his voice devoid of warmth. "You always do this drama when I have a flight." But Laya couldn't process his cruelty, because another sound drifted from the living room that made her blood run cold. The car is downstairs." The voice was light and bubbly with a scent of expensive champagne. Sienna Reed stepped into the hallway, the click of her ankle-strap heels echoing like gunshots in the quiet house. She wore a silk trench coat belted tight, looking effortlessly glamorous at 2 a.m. She stopped when she saw Laya hunched over, hair damp with sweat, clutching her belly. Sienna didn't rush to help. She didn't gasp. She looked at Laya with the mild distaste one might have for a stain on a rug. "Oh," Sienna said, wrinkling her nose. "This is inconvenient." Laya forced herself upright, her legs trembling violently under the weight of the baby and the betrayal. "Get out," she wheezed, the words scraping her throat. "Get out of my house." She looked from the mistress to the husband, waiting for Ryan to finally step up, to defend the sanctity of their marriage, to protect the child about to be born. Ryan grabbed the heavy leather weekender bag by the door. He looked at his wife, then at his mistress, and made his choice with a single brutal motion. "It's not your house," Ryan snapped, flinging the bag past Laya. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. "And you're not going to hold me hostage with your tears." He stepped closer, towering over her, his cologne suffocating her. "I'm done being the bad guy in your stories, Laya. You want to scream? Go outside." He reached for the handle of the massive oak front door, opening it wide to the freezing winter night. The wind howled in, biting at Laya's exposed skin, but Ryan didn't flinch. He gestured to the darkness. "Go." "I'm in labor, Ryan," Laya screamed, the dignity she tried to hold on to shattering under the pressure of another contraction. "This is your child. Our child." She clutched the doorframe, her fingernails digging into the wood, begging him with her eyes to remember the vows he made, the life they planned. Sienna walked past her, brushing shoulders, whispering, "Our complication," as she glided toward the waiting car. Ryan looked at Laya one last time. His eyes were dead. "You're nothing to me now," he said. "Take your mess outside." He didn't shove her physically, but the silence that followed his sentence was a violent push. Laya stumbled backwards onto the stone stoop. The cold air slapped her wet face, freezing the tears instantly on her cheek. A taxi idled at the curb, its exhaust puffing white clouds into the darkness. The driver looked up, confused by the scene. A pregnant woman stumbling out of a multi-million-dollar townhome, sobbing, while a man in a suit stared blankly at her. Laya reached out a hand. "Ryan, please." The door slammed shut. The sound was final. It was the sound of a coffin closing. The lock clicked, a sharp, mechanical sound that severed her past from her future. Laya stood alone in the snow, wearing only thin leggings and a sweater that couldn't stop the wind. Her hospital bag cut into her shoulder. Across the street, a neighbor's light flickered on, a curtain twitching as someone watched the spectacle. Laya wanted to collapse. She tried to lie down on the freezing concrete and let the cold take her. But inside her, the baby kicked, a firm, defiant thud against her ribs. Dignity, her father's voice echoed in her mind, a memory from a life she thought she had lost. Dignity is not a volume, it's a posture. Laya wiped her face with a trembling hand. She didn't look back at the house. She didn't scream at the wood. She limped toward the taxi, her breath coming in sharp, jagged clouds. She pulled the door open and collapsed onto the cracked leather seat. Auntie Mae, she whispered to the driver, her voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger. As the taxi pulled away, her phone buzzed in her hand. The screen lit up the dark cab. A social media notification. Ryan Cole updated his status. Pray for us. Difficult night with L. He stared at the words. A lie. A perfect, curated lie broadcast to the world while she bled on a leather seat. Rage, hot and purifying, began to mix with the pain. He thought she was helpless. He thought she was a charity case. But as she stared at the passing streetlights, Laya remembered the one thing Ryan didn't know. The secret was worth $500 million. It was sitting in a trust fund her father had built, mute and legal, waiting for her signature. For years she had played the role of the supportive, humble wife, hiding the magnitude of her inheritance to protect Ryan's fragile ego. She wanted him to feel like the provider. She wanted their love to be about them, not the money. She had choked down the truth to build him up, and this is how he repaid her. The driver caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "Are you okay, miss?" "I will be," Laya said, and for the first time that night she wasn't crying. Her thumb hovered over the phone screen. She could expose him right now. She could post the truth, but she didn't. She slid the phone into her pocket. Noise was for the weak. Silence was for the powerful. "You don't know what I hold," she thought, watching the city blur past. "But you'll learn. Both of you will learn." The taxi skidded slightly on the slush as it turned into the hospital's emergency bay. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss, admitting her into the blinding white world of the emergency room. It smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. A nurse behind the triage desk looked up, boredom instantly replaced by alarm. "Sweetheart, let's get you inside." The badge on her chest read Nurse Elaine Brooks. She was in her mid-40s, with eyes that had seen everything and judged nothing. She rushed around the counter, guiding Laya into a wheelchair. "First baby?" Elaine asked, her hands moving efficiently to check Laya's pulse. "Yes," Laya gasped, gripping the armrests as another wave of pain tried to tear her apart. "How far apart?" 2, maybe 3 minutes. Elaine paused, looking behind Laya at the empty automatic doors. "You came alone?" The question hung in the air, heavy and shameful. Laya closed her eyes. "He's on a flight." Elaine didn't say a word, but her expression shifted. The professional mask cracked just enough to reveal a fierce, protective anger. "Then I'm your person tonight," she said firmly. She wheeled Laya down the corridor, the wheels squeaking on the linoleum. "We don't need him. We need breath. We need focus." They entered a room filled with machines that hummed and beeped, the soundtrack of modern survival. Elaine helped her change, her movements gentle where Ryan's had been rough. But the peace didn't last. Laya's phone buzzed on the tray table again. "Ryan Cole. Laya is at Mount Sinai. Complications. Keep us in your prayers." Then the comments started rolling in. "Stay strong, Ryan. She's lucky to have you. True husband material." Laya read them, tears burning her eyes. He was stealing the narrative. He was the hero of a tragedy he had caused. She reached for the phone to throw it, to smash it against the wall. But Elaine's hand stopped her. "Turn it off," the nurse murmured, taking the device and tucking it into a drawer out of sight. "Focus on the baby, not the noise." Laya nodded, trying to breathe, trying to center herself. But just as her heart rate began to slow, the door to the delivery room flew open. It wasn't a doctor. It was Helen Harrington. Laya's mother stood there in a beige cashmere coat, pearls glinting under the harsh lights, bringing with her a gust of cold air and disapproval. "Laya," Helen said, her voice clipping the air. "Ryan called me." She didn't ask if Laya was okay. She didn't rush to the bedside. She stood at the foot of the bed, clutching her purse like a shield. "He said you refused help, that you've been emotional." Laya stared at her mother, disbelief warring with exhaustion. "I begged him for a ride, Mom. He threw me out." Helen's lips pursed into a thin line. "He said you frightened him. He was worried about the baby." Laya let out a short, hollow laugh. "Worried? He was worried about catching a flight to Paris with his mistress." Helen sighed, the sound of a parent tired of a toddler's tantrums. "Don't start drama, Laya. You've always had a flair for exaggeration. Ryan provides stability. You react." The word react landed like a physical slap. Nurse Elaine stepped forward, her body blocking Helen's view of Laya. "Mrs. Harrington." Elaine's voice was low but dangerous. "Your daughter is in active labor. She needs to be calm. She does not need judgment." Helen blinked, offended that the help was speaking to her. "And you are the person who stayed," Elaine added, cutting off Helen's retort. Helen scoffed, adjusting her coat. "When you are ready to talk sensibly, Laya, call me." She left without looking back. The door clicked shut, echoing the sound of the front door an hour earlier. Abandonment was becoming a rhythm. Laya whispered into the silence. "She'll tell him I'm unstable. They'll take the baby." Panic began to rise in her chest, a terrified bird beating against her ribs. But then her phone buzzed again. Not a notification. A call. A private number. Laya hesitated. Her hand trembled as she brought the phone to her ear. "Hello." A voice answered, deep, steady, and unmistakably robust. "Miss Harrington, this is Arthur Grant, your father's attorney." Laya's breath hitched. She hadn't spoken to him in 2 years. "I saw the emergency alert linked to your file. Are you safe?" I'm at the hospital," Laya stammered, tears finally spilling over. "Arthur, he's gone. He left me." There was a pause on the line, a silence that felt heavy with calculation. Then Arthur spoke, and his words were not of pity but of war. "I assumed as much. Then you must remember this, Laya. You are not dependent. The trust stands at $500 million under your control the moment you sign." Laya gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles white. "He doesn't know," she whispered, glancing at the drawer where the social media notifications were hidden. "He has no idea." Arthur's voice dropped an octave. "And that ignorance is your greatest weapon. Do not tell him. Let him think you are broken. Let him think you are poor. Let him stay blind," Laya finished, a new sensation rising in her chest. It wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It was the cold, hard steel of leverage. A massive contraction ripped through her body, forcing a cry from her lips. But this time she didn't feel like a victim. He felt like a loaded gun. "I have to go," she gasped. Prepare the papers." Elaine hurried back to the bedside, gripping Laya's shoulder. "That's it, honey. You're strong. You're ready." And for the first time that night, Laya believed her. She wasn't just giving birth to a child. She was giving birth to the woman who would destroy Ryan Cole. The pain rose like a tide she couldn't outrun, blurring the fluorescent lights and shrinking the world down to the rhythm of push, breath, and revenge. The pain wasn't just a sensation anymore. It was a wall Laya had to break through. Every muscle in her body seized. A physical rebellion against the stress and the trauma of the night. Nurse Elaine's voice was a lifeline in the storm, steady and rhythmic, cutting through the haze of agony. "You're doing incredible, Laya. Don't let the fear win." But fear was everywhere. It was in the space beside the bed where a husband should have been holding her hand. It was in the silence of her phone tucked away in the drawer. Laya squeezed the bed rails until her fingernails felt like they might snap. She wasn't just pushing a baby out. She was pushing out the last remnants of the life she thought she had. And with one final guttural scream that tore through the sterile air, the wall broke. The pressure vanished, replaced instantly by a sharp, fierce wail. It cut through the hum of the machines. A sound of pure life, defiant and loud. "It's a girl," Elaine whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She lifted the newborn into the pale morning light filtering through the blinds. The baby was slick, red, and furious, flailing tiny fists against a world that had already tried to reject her. Laya collapsed back against the pillows, chest heaving, sweat matting her hair to her forehead. She waited for the grief to take her, to mourn the family that was broken. But when Elaine placed the warm, wet weight of the baby on her chest, Laya didn't feel grief. She felt a sudden, terrifying clarity. Laya ran trembling fingers along her daughter's cheek, tracing the curve of a jawline that looked so much like her own. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Mommy's here." The baby's cries settled into soft, hitching breath. Her tiny fingers, instinctively searching for safety, curled around the edge of Laya's hospital gown. That grip was an anchor. In the middle of the wreckage of her marriage, Laya found the one thing Ryan couldn't pack in a bag, the one thing he couldn't give to a mistress. She looked up at Elaine, eyes burning with a new kind of fire. "Amelia," she said. "Her name is Amelia Grace." Elaine smiled, reaching for the birth certificate clipboard. "Amelia Grace Cole," she said, clicking her pen. Laya froze. The name Cole hung in the air like a curse. It belonged to the man sipping champagne on a flight to Paris. It belonged to the man who called her nothing. Laya shook her head, the movement slight but absolute. "No," she corrected, her voice gaining a razor-sharp edge. "Not Cole. Harrington. Amelia Grace Harrington." Elaine paused, looking from the baby to the mother. She saw the shift in Laya's eyes, the transition from victim to protector. She nodded, writing the name down in bold ink. But while Laya claimed her daughter's future, the world outside was busy rewriting her past. Hours passed, and the sun rose over a city that had no idea what had happened in room 304. When Amelia finally fell asleep, Laya reached for the drawer. Her hand hovered over the handle. She knew it was poison, but she had to learn the dosage. She opened it and took out her phone. The screen was a wall of notifications. Ryan's post had gone viral. "Sometimes love means letting go. Prayers appreciated." Below it, a comment from Sienna read, "Always praying for strength and peace for you both." It was a masterclass in manipulation. They were the saints. She was the unstable burden they had let go of. Laya scrolled until the letters blurred into a gray smear. "What a strong man," one comment read. "He deserves happiness," said another. Hope the baby is okay, shame about the mother. They had stolen her narrative before she even had a chance to speak. Her chest tightened, a phantom pressure that felt like a heart attack. She wanted to scream the truth, to type out every detail of the 2 a.m. eviction. But then she remembered Arthur Grant's voice. Ignorance is your most significant power. If she screamed now, she was just a bitter ex-wife. If she stayed silent, she was a mystery. And mysteries are dangerous. A soft knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thought. Elaine peeked in, her shift over, a coat draped over her arm. You need rest, honey. The world will still be there when you wake up. Laya looked at the nurse, eyes dry and hard. I can't sleep, she whispered. If I sleep, it'll feel like a nightmare. If I stay awake, I can make a plan. Elaine walked over and tucked the blanket tighter around Amelia. This isn't the end, Laya. I've seen women walk out of here broken, and I've seen them walk out built of steel. You decide which one leaves this room. When the door clicked shut, Laya turned to the window. Snowflakes drifted lazily against the glass. Mommy's not weak, she whispered to the sleeping baby. Mommy's just waiting. 2 weeks later, that wait ended on the curb outside Mount Sinai. Laya Harrington stood in the slush, shivering in a coat that was no longer warm enough for the wind. No luxury SUV idled at the curb. No husband rushed to take the car seat. Just yellow taxis and indifferent strangers. She had torn the hospital bracelet off her wrist and dropped it in a puddle, shedding the label of patient. The taxi driver eyed her through the rearview mirror as she buckled Amelia in. Where to, miss? She hesitated. The townhome on West 73rd wasn't hers. Her bank account, shared with Ryan, had been frozen or drained. She hadn't checked. She didn't want the humiliation. She had $400 in cash and a secret worth $500 million that she couldn't touch yet. Downtown, she said, her voice flat. East 10th. Just drive. The apartment she found was a scar on the city's face. It was a walk up 5 flights of stairs that smelled of cabbage and stale cigarettes. The studio was barely a room. The ceiling leaked a steady, rhythmic drip into a bucket. The mattress on the floor was stained. It was a place where dreams went to die, but for Laya, it was a fortress. She laid Amelia on the mattress and stood in the doorway looking at the peeling paint. This was her reality now, from marble floors to linoleum cracks. But as she locked the flimsy deadbolt, she felt a strange surge of pride. Ryan didn't know where she was, and that meant he couldn't hurt her. For days, survival became a brutal loop. Laya sold her diamond earrings at a pawn shop on 6th Avenue, accepting a fraction of their worth without arguing because Amelia needed the formula. She skipped meals, her stomach cramping with hunger, drinking tap water to fill the void so she could afford diapers. The city that had once photographed her at galas now looked right through her. She was invisible, a ghost in a gray coat. But invisibility had its perks. It allowed her to listen. Every morning she walked to a diner 2 blocks away, Amelia strapped to her chest in a second-hand carrier. The manager, a gruff man named Tony Vega, saw the desperation in her posture and hired her on the spot. Cash only under the table, he muttered. Can you handle double shifts? I can handle anything, Laya replied, and she meant it. She poured coffee for Wall Street types who barely looked at her face. She scrubbed tables while listening to their conversations about stocks, mergers, and, inevitably, Ryan Cole. He's killing it, a blonde woman in a suit whispered one afternoon, poking at a salad. Cole Dynamics stock is up 10% since he dumped the wife. Her companion laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. I heard she went crazy. Postpartum psychosis or something. Tried to burn the house down. Laya's hand froze while pouring water. The pitcher shook. The lies had mutated. They weren't just calling her weak anymore. They were calling her dangerous. She forced herself to pour, to smile, to walk away. Every lie they told was another brick in the wall she was building around her heart. But the breaking point didn't come from a stranger. It came from blood. Her phone rang one evening as she was counting out tips on the cracked table of her apartment. It was Helen. Laya answered, expecting an apology. What she got was a business transaction. Laya. Her mother's voice was crisp, detached. You can't live like this. I heard you're working as a waitress. The disgust in her voice was palpable. Ryan's offered to help. He's worried about the baby's environment. Laya gripped the phone. Help? You mean hush money? Call it what you want, Helen sighed. He's willing to pay for a full-time nanny. A private apartment. All you have to do is sign a shared custody agreement. It's the least you can do after the scene you caused. The room spun. Custody. Ryan didn't want the baby, he wanted the image of the baby. He tried to play the doting father for the cameras while a nanny did the work. He threw me out in labor, Mom, Laya hissed. He chose Paris over his daughter's birth. Stop being dramatic, Helen snapped. Life isn't a movie, Laya. You have no money. You have no home. You have nothing. Ryan is stable. You are not. The words hung in the dank air of the apartment. You have nothing. It was the ultimate trigger. Laya looked at Amelia. sleeping peacefully despite the cold draft. "You're right, Mother," Laya said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "I am done making things bigger than they are. I'm going to make them exactly as big as they deserve to be." She hung up. She didn't cry. Tears were for the woman she used to be. That woman died on the doorstep of the townhouse. Laya walked to the closet and pulled out the only thing of value she had left, a small locked wooden chest her father had given her before he died. She hadn't opened it in years. The hinges groaned as she lifted the lid. Inside, smelling of cedar and old tobacco, were letters. But beneath the letters lay a single cream-colored business card. "Arthur Grant, senior partner, Grant and Hawthorne Law." He picked it up. Her father's handwriting was scrawled on the back. "If you ever lose everything, remember, wealth is not money, it is control. And control begins with silence." Laya traced the ink with a rough, chapped finger. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, shaking the thin window pane. Inside, a transformation was complete. She wasn't a waitress. She wasn't a victim. She was a predator who had been hibernating. She picked up her phone and dialed the number on the card. It rang twice. "Arthur Grant," the deep voice answered. "It's me," Laya said, staring at her reflection in the dark window. "Laya Harrington." A pause, then warmth flooded the line. "I was hoping you'd call." "I can't keep hiding," she said, watching a cockroach skitter across the floor. "He's everywhere. His face, his lies. I'm done surviving, Arthur." Arthur didn't hesitate. "Your father left you more than money, Laya. He left you a mechanism. The trust stands at 500 million. But once you step into that light, there is no going back to the shadows." Laya looked down at her hands, red from scrubbing floors, devoid of her wedding ring. "I don't want the shadows anymore," she whispered. "I want to be the sun that burns them." Arthur's voice turned sharp, professional. "Then we start. But we start quietly. We buy him out from under his own feet before he even knows the ground is moving." "Good," Laya said. "I want him to feel it crumbling." She hung up and looked around the squalid room. It didn't look like a prison anymore. It looked like a war room. And the war had just begun. By summer, the city shimmered with a heat that made the asphalt soft and the tempers short. But inside the high-rise office of Grant and Hawthorne on Park Avenue, the air was cool, crisp, and smelled of money. Laya walked into the lobby wearing a simple black dress she had bought from a thrift store, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. The receptionist looked at her shoes, scuffed flats, and opened her mouth to direct her to the service entrance. But before she could speak, the double mahogany doors swung open. Arthur Grant stood there, arms open, ignoring the hierarchy of his own firm to greet the woman who looked like a pauper but was worth more than the building. He ushered her into his office, a sanctuary of oaken silence that overlooked the chaos of the streets below. Arthur gestured to the leather chair opposite his desk, his eyes scanning her face for the broken girl he had spoken to on the phone. He didn't find her. "Laya," he said, his voice thick with admiration. "You look stronger than the last time we spoke." Laya ran her hand along the armrest, feeling the smooth grain of leather she hadn't touched in months. "I am," she replied, her voice devoid of the tremor that used to define it. "I just didn't realize strength could feel this calm." Arthur smiled, sliding a thick black folder across the polished mahogany. "Calm is the loudest kind of power," he said. "These are the documents to activate the Harrington Trust. Once you sign, the 500 million is liquid. You can buy an island. You can disappear." Laya stared at the pen resting on top of the file. It was heavy, expensive, a tool for making history. "I don't want to disappear," she said, picking it up. "I want to be omnipresent. I want to be the air he chokes on." Arthur nodded, anticipating the hunger in her tone. "I can create subsidiaries, shell corporations. We can hide your name behind layers of bureaucracy so deep he won't know it's you until the knife is already in." Laya's eyes flashed. "Anonymity," she confirmed. "No one knows it's me. Not the board, not the press, and definitely not Ryan." Arthur leaned forward. "We'll move through proxies. A Delaware entity named Harrington Ventures will front the transactions." "Good," Laya said, flipping the folder open. The numbers on the page were staggering, a string of zeros that represented absolute freedom. "And the first move?" Arthur asked, testing her resolve. Laya didn't look up. Her pen hovered over the signature line. "Ryan's company," she said softly. "Coal Dynamics. I want a full forensic audit of his vulnerabilities, assets, debts, weak spots." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "That's personal, Laya." She looked him dead in the eye. "He built his empire on my emotional labor and my father's connections. I'm just taking back my investment with interest." She signed her name. The ink was dark and permanent. With that scratch of a pen, the waitress from the diner vanished and the predator arrived. Across town, in a penthouse that dripped with glass and arrogance, Ryan Cole was already feeling the temperature drop, though he didn't know why. He paced in front of his floor-to-ceiling windows, a phone pressed to his ear, his reflection looking thinner and more haggard than the magazine covers suggested. "What do you mean the investors are pulling out?" he barked, his voice echoing in the vast modern living room. "They've been with me for years." His assistant's voice trembled on the other end, tinny and frightened. "Sir, it's the market confidence. An anonymous firm has been quietly buying shares. They're moving fast. It's destabilizing everything." Ryan slammed his hand against the glass, leaving a smudge on the pristine view. "Find out who they are," he shouted. "I want a name." "I'm trying, sir," the assistant stammered, "but they're using offshore accounts. It's a ghost firm." Ryan hung up, throwing the phone onto the $10,000 sofa. "Offshore cowards," he muttered, raking a hand through his hair. He turned to pour himself a drink, his hand shaking slightly. He was the king of New York, the visionary behind Coal Dynamics. He wasn't supposed to be fighting ghosts, but as he lifted the crystal decanter, he felt eyes on him. Sienna Reed stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him with the detached amusement of a cat watching a mouse struggle in a trap. She held a mimosa, her silk robe slipping off one shoulder, looking every bit the trophy he had traded his family for. "You're stressed," she purred, taking a sip. "It's not a good look, darling." Ryan glared at her, the alcohol burning his throat. "I'm fine," he lied. Sienna walked closer, her perfume cloying and sweet. "You're not," she corrected smoothly. "You haven't slept in days. You check your phone like it's oxygen." "What's wrong, Ryan? Is the empire crumbling?" "I built this from nothing," Ryan snapped, his ego bruised under her gaze. "No one is taking it from me. Not some anonymous investor." Sienna set her glass down on the marble counter with a sharp clink. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Everyone who says that ends up losing everything," she whispered. It was a prophecy delivered with a smile. She turned and walked away, leaving him alone with his expensive scotch and his mounting dread. She picked up her own phone, texting a contact named Charles Whitmore. "He's unraveling. Be ready." Sienna Reed didn't love Ryan Cole. She loved the platform he provided. And she knew better than anyone, you never stay on a sinking ship. That night, while Ryan drank himself into a stupor, Laya sat at her small chip table in the East 10th Street apartment. The contrast was jarring. She was a multimillionaire living in squalor. But for the first time, the poverty didn't feel like a cage. It felt like camouflage. Her laptop glowed in the dark room, casting blue light on her face. An email from Arthur popped up. "Transaction complete. You now own 21% of Coal Dynamics." Laya stared at the screen. 21%. It was enough to demand financial transparency. It was enough to be a nuisance. But it wasn't enough to kill him. She typed back a single line. "Not enough. Push for 40%. I want to see him sweat." She closed the laptop and walked over to the crib where Amelia slept. The baby's chest rose and fell in a peaceful rhythm, unaware that her mother was currently orchestrating a corporate siege. Laya brushed a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "He thinks he's fighting the market," she whispered to the sleeping child. "He thinks it's just business. He doesn't know it's a punishment." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose window frame. It was the sound of a storm coming, one that Laya controlled. Autumn arrived with a vengeance, stripping the trees bare and turning the city gray. Inside the glossy headquarters of Coal Dynamics, the atmosphere was suffocating. The whispers in the break room had turned into shouts in the boardroom. Ryan sat at the head of the table, his tie loosened, dark circles carved deep under his eyes. "Sir," Gavin, his young, terrified assistant, whispered, leaning in. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting." Ryan didn't look up from the tablet in front of him. The screen showed a graph that looked like a cliff dive. "Tell them I'm busy," Ryan hissed. "They said it's not optional, sir." Ryan slammed his pen down, the sound cracking like a whip in the silent office. "Then tell them to wait until I finish saving the company they're panicking over." Gavin nodded and fled the room. Ryan was alone again. He opened a new tab on his browser. The name Harrington Ventures mocked him. They were buying everything. Suppliers were dropping contracts. Distributors were stalling. It was a coordinated, precise, surgical attack. "Who are you?" Ryan muttered to the empty room. "Who hates me this much?" He didn't have to wait long for the next blow. His phone buzzed, not a text but a news alert. Whitmore Industries withdraws from merger talks with Coal Dynamics, citing instability in leadership. Ryan froze. The merger was his lifeboat. Without Whitmore, the company would drown in debt within the quarter. He stood up, knocking his chair over, and dialed Sienna. She was supposed to be massaging the deal with Whitmore. She was supposed to charm him. The phone rang. It went to voicemail. Ryan stared at the device, a cold realization seeping into his bones. He walked out of his office and took the private elevator to the penthouse. He needed to see her. He needed to scream at someone. When the elevator doors opened, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. "Sienna?" he called out. No answer. He walked into the bedroom. The closet doors were open. The shelves that had held her designer bags, her silk dresses, her endless rows of shoes, were empty. She hadn't just left. She had evacuated. On the dresser, a note sat next to his wedding ring, the one he had taken off to be with her. He picked up the paper. It wasn't an apology. It was an invoice of sorts. Sorry, darling. I never bet on losers. Say hello to your new reality. Ryan crumbled the note in his fist. He looked around the penthouse. It was huge, expensive, and terrifyingly empty. The silence that Laya had once endured in this very house now belonged entirely to him. But the silence didn't last. The next morning, the world woke up to the noise. Laya sat in Arthur's office, a fresh newspaper placed gently on the desk before her. The headline was bold, black, and damning. Anonymous investor identified as Harrington Ventures, and beneath it the subheadline that drove the nail into the coffin: firm linked to reclusive heiress of late tech billionaire Edward Harrington. Arthur watched her read it. They're starting to connect the dots, he warned. Ryan isn't stupid. He'll figure out who the heiress is. Laya looked up from the paper. Her eyes were clear, calm, and dangerous. I don't want him to guess anymore, she said. I want him to know. She stood up, smoothing the fabric of her tailored charcoal suit. You said once I cross 40%, I have majority influence? Yes. Arthur nodded slowly. You can call for a vote of no confidence. You can remove the CEO. Laya walked to the window, looking out at the skyline that Ryan thought he owned. Schedule the vote, she commanded, her reflection in the glass merging with the steel of the city. I want to look him in the eye when I take it all back. The game of cat and mouse was over. The lion was coming to eat. The morning of the vote, the Cole Dynamics boardroom felt less like a meeting place and more like an execution chamber. 12 men and women in tailored suits sat around the long glass table, their reflections distorted in the polished surface. Outside, the Manhattan skyline glittered, indifferent to the tension inside. Ryan Cole sat at the head of the table, but he didn't look like a leader. He looked like a man holding onto a cliff by his fingernails. His tie was crooked, his eyes were bloodshot, darting between the faces of board members who refused to meet his gaze. He tapped a pen against the glass. Tap, 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 a nervous rhythm that echoed his racing heart. He told himself it was a mistake, a clerical error. It couldn't be her. It was impossible. But deep down, in the pit of his stomach where arrogance used to live, he knew the impossible was about to walk through the door. Let's get this over with, Ryan snapped, his voice cracking slightly. Whoever is behind this Harrington Ventures stunt is about to learn that I don't scare easily. He tried to project power, but the room smelled of his fear, a mix of stale coffee and desperation. The chairman, Evelyn Torres, checked her watch and said nothing. She just looked at the double doors, and then right on cue the handle turned. The doors didn't bang open. They glided apart with a smooth, terrifying silence. Laya Harrington stepped into the room. The air seemed to leave the space instantly. She wasn't wearing the stained sweatpants of a rejected wife or the hospital gown of a trauma victim. She wore a charcoal gray power suit, tailored to the millimeter, sharp enough to cut glass. Her hair was swept back in a severe, elegant twist. Her makeup was minimal, highlighting eyes that looked like flint. She didn't look at the floor. She didn't tremble. She walked toward the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, her heels clicking a steady, rhythmic countdown on the hardwood floor. Ryan's pen fell from his hand, clattering loudly against the glass table. He stood up, his legs knocking into his chair, sending it skidding backwards. Laya. The name left his mouth like a question he didn't want answered. He stared at her, searching for the woman he had broken. But that woman was gone. In her place sat a stranger who looked at him not with love or even hate, but with absolute indifference. Good morning, Mr. Cole, she said, her voice smooth and cool like water running over ice. I believe you were expecting a representative from Harrington Ventures. The board members exchanged stunned glances. Whispers broke out like a sudden fire. The wife. Is that her? Ryan gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. You, he stammered, a nervous laugh bubbling up in his throat. You're behind this. This is a joke. He looked around the room for support but found none. You think you can just waltz in here and play business? Laya placed a thin folder on the table. She didn't blink. I'm not waltzing, Ryan, she said softly. I'm reclaiming. Ryan's voice rose, shrill and defensive. I built this company. I built it from the ground up while you sat at home. Laya tilted her head, her expression almost pitying. You built it with lies, she corrected, her volume never rising, which only made her words heavier. You built it with borrowed money, creative accounting, and the social capital of my father's name. You built a house of cards, Ryan. And now, she slid the folder forward. The wind has changed. Evelyn Torres cleared her throat, silencing the room. She picked up the document Laya had provided. Per the company bylaws, Evelyn announced, her tone strictly professional. Ms. Harrington's controlling stake of 51% grants her the authority to call for an immediate leadership review. Ryan felt the blood drain from his face. 51%. She hadn't just bought a seat at the table. She had purchased the table. You can't do this, he whispered, the fight draining out of him. Laya, please. The company is my life. No, she said, leaning forward, her eyes locking onto his. The company was your vanity. Your life was the family you threw away. She gestured to the board. Proceed with the vote. Ryan looked at the 12 people he had employed, dined with, and charmed for years. He pleaded with his eyes. Please help me. But in the corporate world, loyalty is currency, and Ryan was bankrupt. Evelyn raised her hand. All in favor of removing Ryan Cole as CEO of Cole Dynamics. Effective immediately. One hand went up, then another, then a third. Ryan watched in horror as a forest of hands rose against him. Every single member of the board voted yes. Even Evelyn. The motion carried in total silence. Ryan stood frozen, a king stripped of his crown in under 60 seconds. He looked at Laya, searching for a shred of the woman who used to beg for his attention. You're enjoying this, he accused, his voice shaking with tears. You wanted to hurt me. Laya stood up. She was shorter than he, but in that moment she towered over the entire room. No, Ryan, she said, picking up her bag. Enjoyment is temporary. Justice is permanent. She turned to leave, signaling that the meeting and his career was over. Ryan scrambled around the table, grabbing her arm. It was a mistake. Security guards stepped forward instantly, but Laya held up a hand to stop them. She looked down at Ryan's hand on her sleeve, then up at his face. He released her as if burned. You said I was nothing, she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. You said I should take my mess outside. Now, she gestured to the security guards. You can take yours. She turned her back on him and walked toward the doors. Ryan stood in the center of the room, alone in a crowd. Laya, he shouted, a desperate, broken sound. She didn't flinch. She didn't stop. She walked through the doors and into the hallway. Flashbulbs exploded. The corridor was lined with press, tipped off by an anonymous source Arthur Grant had arranged. Laya kept her head high, her face a mask of calm determination as cameras clicked furiously. Behind her, the doors opened again and Ryan Cole stumbled out, flanked by security, looking disheveled and defeated. The image was captured instantly, the calm, powerful woman walking into the future, and the broken man crumbling in her wake. It was the photo that would define the decade. By noon, the fallout was nuclear. The headlines screamed across every screen in America. Wife kicked out in labor returns as billionaire. From homeless to head honcho, the Laya Harrington story. The internet, which had once called her unstable, now worshipped her. TikToks dissecting Ryan's downfall garnered millions of views. The comments section, once a place of pity, was now a stadium of applause. She played the long game. Queen behavior. Ryan Cole is finished. Ryan sat in the wreckage of his penthouse, which he now realized he couldn't afford. The eviction notice lay on the coffee table next to an empty bottle of scotch. His phone buzzed incessantly, but not with support. Sponsors were pulling out. Friends were blocking his number. He was radioactive. He needed Sienna. She was the only one who understood the game. He redialed her number, desperate for a connection, for a plan. This time she didn't answer, but the internet did. An entertainment news alert flashed across his TV screen. New power couple alert. The footage showed Sienna Reid in Milan, draped in diamonds, laughing as she held onto the arm of Charles Whitmore, Ryan's biggest rival. A reporter shoved a microphone in her face. Sienna, any comment on Ryan Cole's termination? Sienna paused, smiled her lethal red-lipped smile and shrugged. Ryan who? I prefer men who own their companies, not men who lose them. Ryan threw the remote at the TV. The screen shattered, fracturing Sienna's face into 1,000 jagged shards. He sank to the floor, burying his head in his hands. The silence of the apartment was deafening. He had traded a wife who loved him for a mistress who used him, and a legacy he didn't earn for a humiliation he couldn't escape. He was finally, truly alone. Meanwhile, miles away in a quiet suburban mansion, Helen Harrington sat in her armchair, staring at the broadcast. Her tea had gone cold. The daughter she had called dramatic was currently being interviewed on CNN, looking poised, articulate, and powerful. The scrolling ticker at the bottom of the screen read, Harrington pledges to clean up corporate culture. Helen felt a cold knot of shame tighten in her chest. She had bet on the wrong horse. She had chosen the stable husband over her own flesh and blood. She reached for the phone, her fingers trembling. She dialed the number she had ignored for months. It rang 3 times before Laya answered. "This is Laya Harrington." The voice was professional, guarded. "Laya, darling," Helen said, forcing a brightness into her tone that didn't exist. "Mom, I saw the news. I'm so proud of you. I knew you had it in you." There was a pause on the line, a silence so heavy it felt like Judgment Day. "No, you didn't," Laya said calmly. "Sweetheart, I was just... You called me unstable," Laya interrupted, her voice devoid of anger but full of truth. "You took his side. You told me I was unfit to be a mother because I was poor. Don't try to rewrite history just because I made the headlines." Helen gasped, clutching her pearls. "I made mistakes, Laya, but I am still your mother. And I am still your daughter," Laya said. "But you will never use that word as leverage again. I'm not your retirement plan mother. I'm the woman you underestimated." The line went dead. Helen stared at the phone, the dial tone buzzing like a hornet in her ear. She was cut off. The money, the access, the prestige, it was all gone. She sat alone in her expensive house, realizing that her daughter had learned the lesson of dignity far better than Helen ever had. That evening, Laya stood in her new office, Ryan's old corner suite. The decor was already changing. The black leather and chrome were gone, replaced by warm cream tones and soft lighting. A framed photo of Amelia sat on the desk, the only decoration that mattered. Arthur Grant knocked softly on the doorframe. "It's done," he said, holding a tablet. "Sienna has been indicted for corporate espionage based on the files we found. Whitmore is distancing himself. And Ryan has filed for personal bankruptcy." Laya turned from the window. The city lights haloed her silhouette. "So the noise is finally gone," she said. Arthur nodded, a small, proud smile playing on his lips. "You wiped the board clean, Laya. What now?" Laya looked at the photo of her daughter. The baby who had been born in a storm was now safe. "Now," Laya said, touching the glass of the frame, We build something that doesn't need revenge to stand tall." 3 years later, New York looked different to Laya Harrington. Not because the streets had changed or the buildings had shifted, but because her vantage point had risen. She wasn't looking up from the gutter anymore. She was looking down from the clouds. The skyline that once mocked her with its unattainable luxury now reflected in the windows of her own penthouse office. The LH Group wasn't just a company. It was an ecosystem. It funded renewable energy, tech startups led by women, and, most personally, the Safe Harbor Initiative, a housing program for single mothers in crisis. Inside the office, Laya moved with the quiet assurance of a woman who had nothing left to prove. She wore white, a color she never dared to wear when she was hiding in the dirt of poverty. Her assistant, a sharp young man named David, buzzed the intercom. "Miss Harrington, there's someone in the lobby to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent." Laya didn't look up from her documents. "Who is it?" Pause. A hesitation that spoke volumes. "It's Ryan Cole." The pen in Laya's hand stopped moving. The room went silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning. For a heartbeat, the old fear tried to flare up. The memory of the slamming door, the cold wind, the pain. But she breathed in, and the fear vanished, replaced by a profound calm. She closed her laptop. "Send him up," she said. She wasn't afraid of ghosts anymore. When the elevator doors slid open, Laya almost didn't recognize him. The man who stepped out wasn't the titan of industry who had sneered at her tears. He was a ghost of himself. His suit was off the rack, ill-fitting at the shoulders. His hair was thinning, gray at the temples. But it was his eyes that held the most significant change. The arrogance was gone, hollowed out by 3 years of humiliation and regret. He stood awkwardly in the plush entrance of her office, holding a hat in his hands like a beggar. "Laya," he breathed, his voice rough. He took in the room, the view, the aura of power that radiated from her. "You look incredible." Laya stood behind her desk, not offering a hand or a seat. She regarded him. "And you look like a man who finally understands consequences," she said, not unkindly but truthfully. Ryan flinched. He walked closer, stopping a respectable distance away. "I lost everything," he admitted, the words tumbling out. "The company, the house. My name is poison in this city. I can't even get an interview for a consulting gig." "Then I suppose life finally gave you what you gave me," Laya said softly. "Balance." Ryan swallowed hard, looking down at his scuffed shoes. "I came to apologize, not to ask for money. Not to ask for a job, just to say I was wrong. About everything." He looked up, tears swimming in his eyes. "I thought love was control. I thought success was noise. But I see now. You were the only thing that ever mattered. And I threw you away like garbage." Laya studied him. She saw the sincerity, but she also saw the wreckage. "You didn't come for forgiveness, Ryan," she said, walking around the desk to stand in front of him. "You came for absolution. You want me to tell you it's okay so you can sleep at night." His voice cracked. Maybe I just need to know you don't hate me." She sighed. a sound of releasing a heavy weight she had carried for too long. I don't hate you, Ryan. Hate takes energy, and I have none left for you. You once told me I was nothing, she continued, her voice steady, that I would die with my pain. You never imagined I would live with it instead, that I would use it as fuel. He nodded, wiping a tear from his cheek. I deserve that. Every bit of it. No, she said, shaking her head. You deserve to heal, not to be destroyed again, because I'm done living in the ruins you built. She walked to the door and opened it. Leave with dignity, Ryan. That's something you never gave me, so give it to yourself now. He looked at her, stunned by the mercy he hadn't earned. He nodded once, a broken, grateful movement. Thank you, Laya. He walked to the elevator and stepped inside. As the doors closed, he looked at her one last time, a vision of the life he could have had if he hadn't been a fool. The doors shut. The ghost was gone. Laya turned back to the room. Arthur Grant stepped in from the side office, having watched the exchange. You all right? He asked gently. Laya smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Better than I've ever been. That night, the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered like the inside of a diamond. The Harrington Foundation Gala was the event of the season. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the elite of New York. Politicians, artists, and billionaires, all gathered to celebrate the woman who had rebuilt more than an empire. She had rebuilt faith. Laya stood at the center of the room in an ivory gown, holding a glass of water. She didn't need champagne to feel intoxicated. The air was thick with triumph. Arthur approached her, beaming like a proud father. You did it, Laya. The foundation raised over $100 million tonight. Do you know how many families that will save? Laya looked out at the sea of faces. My father planted the seed, she said. I just watered it with everything I lost. Arthur squeezed her shoulder. He'd be proud, not of the money, but of the woman. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Laya stepped up to the microphone. The room hushed instantly. A reverence fell over the crowd. When I was younger, she began, her voice clear and amplified, reaching every corner of the hall, I thought strength meant never breaking, but life taught me something truer. She paused, scanning the darkness. Real strength is breaking and rebuilding anyway. Years ago I lost everything. My marriage, my name, my dignity. I was left standing in the snow with nothing but a child in my arms and a world convinced I was unstable. But what the world called madness was really pain waiting to find its voice. The audience leaned in. I stand here today not because I won a war, but because I refuse to stay a victim. Pain is not the end. It is the beginning of purpose. And when we use it right, it builds something indestructible. Applause began. Soft at first, then swelling into a thunderous roar. People rose to their feet. Laya smiled, tears shining in her eyes. This foundation isn't just my story, she said. It's for every woman who was told she was too emotional, too dramatic, too much, and decided to rise anyway. At the very back of the room, near the exit signs, a man in a plain gray suit stood in the shadows. Ryan Cole watched the ovation. He didn't clap. He didn't cheer. He bore witness. There was no bitterness left in his heart, only the haunting awe of watching a woman he once destroyed become a light he could never touch. He turned and slipped out the door, disappearing into the night, leaving her to her glory. Laya raised her glass to the crowd. To rebirth, she whispered. To rebirth, the room echoed back. As the violins swelled, Laya walked off the stage. She didn't stop to mingle. She walked out the side door into the cool night air of Central Park. A black car waited. Inside, a 3-year-old girl with curly hair was asleep in a car seat. Laya slid in next to her, brushing a kiss on Amelia's forehead. The baby stirred, opening sleepy eyes. Mama, I'm here, baby, Laya whispered, pulling the blanket up. She looked out the window as the car pulled away, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold. The townhome on 73rd Street was a distant memory. The cold pavement was a lesson learned. Laya Harrington looked up at the stars blinking above the skyline, unblinking witnesses to a story that had come full circle. We're free now, Amelia, she whispered into the dark. We finally are.